Hi, today we're going to be covering Lesson 2, Session 2. It will be pages 21 through 24 in your Ready workbook. So go ahead and open your Ready workbook to page 21. Today we're going to be finding the volume of a rectangular prism by filling it with unit cubes and then counting the cubes. So that's our objective for today. So go ahead and turn your book to page 21. Now on page 21, we have this problem. It says, we're just going to go through and read the problem one time through. Abigail uses cardboard to build a rectangular prism like the one shown below. What is the volume of the prism? So the first thing we need to do is we need to see, what is this problem about? And this problem is about Abigail building a rectangular prism. So that's what this problem is about. We're going to see all about building this rectangular prism. So next we need to go, okay, so that's what the problem is about, but what is it that we actually need to know? What is it that we're trying to solve? So what we're trying to solve is, what is the volume of the prism? So in other words, that's the meat and potatoes. How do we find the volume of the prism? And so in order to do that, we need to go, okay, what information is important? Now, I don't know if there's any information that's super important in the problem itself, but then look below the problem. You can see here that there's quite a bit of information that's important. So the first thing that I notice is, if we look at this unit cube here, we're going to see that this unit cube is giving you your unit of measure. What is that unit of measure? That's right, it is centimeters. So we need to circle that centimeter because that is important information. The other important information that we need to know is they're giving us how many centimeters long the length is, how many centimeters wide the width is, and how many centimeters tall the height is. So what I'd like you to do right now, before I do that, I'm going to go back and reread the question just one more time. Abigail uses cardboard to build a rectangular prism like the one shown below. What is the volume of the prism? So I want to see if you can use what you know about volume to find out how many of these unit cubes could fit inside of that rectangular prism. I want you to go ahead right now and pause the video and do the work in this section that's allowed or given to you on the bottom of page 21. So go ahead and pause the video. All right, I hope that you paused the video. If not, do it now. All right, I'm actually not going to do the problem here. We're going to go on to the next page, page 22, and I'm going to show you a couple of different ways that you could have solved it on page 22. And then you're going to go back and check later on and say, how did I solve it versus how did we solve it on page 22. So if we're looking at page 22, up top is the same problem that we just talked about. We know that Abigail's building a cardboard rectangular prism. We know that we want to find the volume. We know that we're talking about centimeters, and we know that this rectangular prism is 4 centimeters long, 2 centimeters wide, and 3 centimeters tall. So the first method that they give us is in this picture it, and it says, you can find the volume of the prism by filling it with unit cubes and counting the number of cubes. So using unit cubes that are each 1 centimeter, you could go in and put those cubes in. And so that's when your highlighters would come in handy if you had the picture drawn like this, because you could highlight your 3 layers. And I know that there's 3 layers because the rectangular prism is 3 centimeters tall. So that tells me that there are 3 layers. That's the first layer. That's the second layer. And then finally, the third layer. Next, so we know there are 3 layers because it's 3 centimeters tall. Next, we need to find out how many unit cubes are in one layer. So remember, the easiest way when you're looking at it this direction is just to count the tops of just the top layer. So if we count all of those dots, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, we know that there's 8 cubes in each layer. Now remember, you don't count the sides of the cubes. You're only going to count the tops of the unit cubes. There we go. Once we know how many layers we have and how many cubes there are in each layer, then we can go ahead and write a multiplication sentence. So there are 3 layers times 8 cubes, which equals 24 cubic. Now, what was the unit of measure that went with its cubic? It's not cubic units. It's not cubic feet. What is it? Cubic centimeters. That's right. Cubic centimeters. Is this method similar to the way you solved it back on page 21? Maybe. All right, now I'm going to show you another way where you wouldn't have to fill in all of the unit cubes, where you could just fill in some of the unit cubes. So you can also find the volume by counting the number of cubes in one layer and then the number of layers. Use unit cubes that are 1 cubic centimeter. So the way that we do this is they've drawn it here for you. I'm going to draw it up here to show you what they did. So first of all, we know that there are 3 layers. So I'm going to start out with just drawing just one of those layers. So first we have 1 layer. Then we know that our length is broken into 4 centimeters. So I'm going to break that layer into 4 parts. And then our width is 2 centimeters, so I'm going to break our width into 2 parts. Then what you do is you just connect all of your lines. Little tricky, but by doing that, I can see that I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 8 cubes in one layer. Then if you look down below, so I drew my 8 cubes in one layer, then we see here they drew that there were 3 layers. The first layer is here, and then the second layer is this cube. We don't need to color them all in because we know when we fill all the space that this entire layer is going to have the same number of cubes as this bottom layer. And this top layer is going to have the same number of cubes as the second layer and the third layer. So we know that we have 8 cubes in one layer times 3 cubes high. So either way that you solved it, you would know. Now it's interesting because here we see that we have 8 cubes in one layer. And we have the bottom layer is 4 units long and 2 units wide. Interesting. If we look at that 4 and 2 and that 8, what do we notice? Keep that in your brain because we're going to need it in just a moment. We're going to go ahead and go to the next page, page 23. All right, now we will use the problem from the previous page to help us understand how to find the volume of a rectangular prism. So, number 1 says this. Look at the model and picture it on the previous page. So when they say picture it, we're going to look for this heading that also says picture it. And then that means we're going to be looking at this model here. Count the number of cubes in one layer. So remember, in this case, the easiest layer to look at is that top layer, and we only count the tops of each cube. We don't count the sides. We only count the top of each cube that we can see. So how many were there? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. There are 8 cubes in one layer. Number 2 asks us, how could you find the number of cubes in one layer without counting the cubes? This is where it comes in handy to look at the base of this layer. And we see that it is 4 centimeters long and 2 centimeters wide. What do we know about that 4 and 2 and knowing that there are 8 in all? What operation could you use to find out how many cubes were in one layer without counting the cubes? All right, I wanted to give you some time to think. If it were me, I would recognize that 4 times 2 equals 8. So if I look at the length and the width of just the bottom of the pyramid, I can know that there are 8 cubic squares, or we'll say cubes. There are 8 cubes in one layer because the length times the width equals 1 layer. So the length is 4 and the width is 2. Great job if you recognize that 4 times 2 is 8, and that tells us, without even drawing any cubes, that our base would have 8 cubes in or our bottom layer would have 8 cubes. I'm trying to tell you your vocabulary words before we get there. Number 3 says, once you know how many cubes are in one layer, what else do you need to know to find the volume? So remember, to find the volume, we need to have a length and a width, and then we also need to have a height. We're not calling it height just yet. We know that we have to figure out how many cubes are in one layer, but then what's that next piece of information that we need to have? Go ahead and pause the video, write your answer, and then come unpause and see if you got the same answer I did. All right, you need to know how many layers are in the prism. So if you know how many cubes are in one layer, we already decided that there were 8 cubes in one layer. Next, we need to know how many layers are there. So the way that we find out how many layers is how tall is the rectangular prism. So there are 8 cubes in each layer, and there are 3 layers. What multiplication expression can you write to find the volume of the prism? Go ahead and write that now. All right, you could write 8 cubes in each layer times 3 layers. That is the multiplication expression to find the volume of this rectangular prism. So now, for number 5, we get to solve this expression. What is the volume of Abigail's rectangular prism? Well, 8 times 3 equals 24 cubic. And then what was the unit of measure that we're using? That's right, centimeters. Now on your own, right now, I would like you to explain how you can use multiplication to find the volume of a rectangular prism. You can pause it, and then when you come back, I'll tell you what I think, and you can see if you came up with the same idea. All right, so first, I find out how many, I want to find out, or actually I'm not going to say it that way. First, I'm even going to go get a little more tricky. All right. First, I multiply the length and the width to find out how many cubes are in one layer. Then I multiply that number by how many layers are in the rectangular prism. To find the total volume. Now you don't have to write it exactly the way that I wrote it, but you just need to notice that there's really two steps. The first step is to find out how many cubes are in one layer by multiplying the length and the width, and that tells you how many cubes are in one layer. Then you multiply that product by the number of layers that are in the prism to get the final volume, or the total volume, of the whole rectangular prism. So you're going to go ahead and answer number 7 on your own. I want you to try and come up with the best answer that you can come up with for this problem. It says, look back at your try it strategies. So you're going to go all the way back here out to page 21 and look at the strategy that you used to solve this problem. Then I want you to look at the picture it model and the picture it and then the model it. Which models or strategies do you like best for finding the volume of a rectangular prism? Explain. I like the strategy where and then I want you to finish that sentence and then say because, and then tell me why. So tell me, which strategy do you like? Counting, do you like finding the volume by filling it with unit cubes and counting the cubes? Do you like finding out how many are in one layer and then multiplying it by how many layers? Or do you have a method that you did on your own that you prefer more than either of those methods? Share that answer on your paper on number 7. And then after this, you can go ahead and work on your independent work in Google Classroom.